Everybody's read Pericles and knows that play really, really well, right? A few of us, right? And so, but we know that George Wilkins came to Shakespeare with this plot and then said, "Can you help me fill in what's happening in the different scenes?" So that it's like that, but without even somebody coming and saying, "I have a plot." We have a loose association.
And As You Like It is based on a French romance. It's more about the how than the what. It's more about the medium than the message. You know, to use some 1960s Beatlesque.
It's kind of a sustained mood of frivolity, I think. I mean, it's like it's a euphoric kind of experience. I think the whole way.
Right. Yeah. But with dips, with rises and dips, there's a sad part, there's a happy part, there's a manic part. You know, there's a horny part of the play. And this production of As You Like It, what is so special about it? This company from Canada called Bard on the Beach in Vancouver got the rights to use the Beatles' music and integrated the Beatles' music dramaturgically, theatrically with Shakespeare's play. So we like to say here, it's two British geniuses, the genius of Shakespeare and the genius of the Beatles, two great tastes that go...
Separated by half a millennium.
Right, separated by 350 years. You know, 1599, the Queen is named Elizabeth. It's the beginning of the Age of Empire. 1967, the Queen is still named Elizabeth. But empire is kind of over, right? The sunrise and sunset of this period of British Empire. So we've gathered this panel together today to talk about, to tease this production, for those of you about to see it, and to contextualize how Shakespeare and the Beatles work together. What kind of parallels, what kind of overlaps, what kind of fascinating dissimilarities and similarities are there between these two titanic things in world history and popular culture. And I think, Jennifer, it would be great to start with Shakespeare and talk specifically about how music functions in Shakespeare's plays and how music functions in As You Like It.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And I'm going to, without giving away too much, I don't think, I hope not, but I'm going to use the production here to talk about a lot of overlaps between what we know about early practices in the Shakespearean theater, kind of broadly, the Renaissance theater, really, and then how this production really employs a lot of those same tactics. So the big ticket item, and something that I adored about this particular production, is the fact that the actors are, I think, incredibly strong musicians themselves, right? So often for modern productions of Shakespeare, you'll have a composer. I've heard that Chad has done this too, write music for, let's see, we want to put up Love's Labour's Lost. We need a whole new score. We hire Chad to do this for us, right? Which can result, as we were talking about earlier, in really beautiful settings and music and things like that. And sometimes the music is piped in. A lot of times it's pre-recorded. This doesn't do that. This has the musicians and I would call them musicians / actors, really, because so many people are switching out from being on the stage, performing, playing on their instruments, switching their instruments, right? They're very, very versatile performers too, to coming out and playing a line. I believe, and please correct me if I'm wrong about this, that Ben Elliott, who plays the role of Silvius, is also the music arranger and director for this production, which again, it's genius in the sense that he's so incredibly talented in wearing both hats, I guess, which, thinking about this in a Renaissance context, that's exactly how the performers were. They were kind of jacks of all trade, I suppose, in the sense that they were able to wrestle and tumble and juggle and tell jokes and sing these really incredibly lovely pieces of music and remember. Gosh, I remember somebody's citation of like 100,000 lines of text at a given time in their lives, right? With all of the different plays they had in their heads, right? Incredibly gifted individuals, and this performance, I think, plays into that as well by not having the musicians as kind of this offstage, obscene, like separate thing from the dramatic action. So that, I think, is one of the key things that I find so compelling about this performance and so fascinating about thinking about Renaissance drama, right? We think oftentimes our drama is presented as non-musical in a lot of contexts, but for a Shakespearean audience for Shakespearean theater, for Renaissance theater more broadly, it absolutely, these were two intertwined skills instead of separate. Another thing I alluded to is that the band, the musicians, they're on stage. They're kind of circling in and out, cycling through. So it's a real pleasure to see that in the Renaissance Theater. From what we can tell, the music, it was only live music, right, all the time, all acoustic. There was an upper back balcony called the music room in the back area of the theater. So the music was actually elevated above, and we think that was because of the lack of amplified sound. Sound can carry when it's up higher and shoot out over the audience and kind of fall down, and it allows for really interesting effects, especially when there's divine intervention and things like that. Another thing, I think for me, the biggest...
That's interesting, I didn't know that.
Yeah. Thank you for that. The biggest thing for me that I find really compelling about the way that music is working in this production, and there are the original, I counted this today, the original production of As You Like It had about 7 pieces of sung music, give or take a little bit. 2 of which were fairly popular, we know. One was a piece called Under the Greenwood Tree, and during the scene, Amiens, the character Amiens sings that. We have the music of the spheres being piped in, if you can hear it. It's quite lovely. And then the second piece that's sung by Touchstone and some foresters is one you might know if you're familiar with Renaissance English music at all, and that piece is called It Was a Lover and His Lass. And this is a standout because for years it was believed, and some still believe, that an early rendition of this piece, published in about the year 1600 in Thomas Morley's Plain and Easy Introduction to Practical Music, was a probable setting, which is to say that the music in that printed version was probably close to what was performed in original or early productions of As You Like It. We don't get to hear those today, and that's not a bad thing, I don't think. I bring this up to say that the music that Shakespeare's audience would have heard in original or early productions of As You Like It would have been popular music to them. They would go into the theater, oh, they're doing It Was a Lover and His Lass. I love that song, right? For us, we don't get that same vibe today, I don't think. Even those of us who study early music, right? We know it, and that's what all 25 of us who work in the field, right? It's not a big popular draw, right? The Beatles, however, is. I think part of the joy of this production, from me, who is not at all a Beatles expert, but a fan, I would say, of their music, is you hear the first couple chords, you hear the first few notes. Oh my God, I love that song. Help. Oh, Money, yes, right? Let It Be, personal favorite. They do a smashing job with that. So this is all to say that for a modern audience, our experience of the music in this production is very similar, I think, to Shakespeare's early audience's experience of going to a play, going to hear a play, as they would say in their day, and hearing music that would have been popular and familiar to them being then put up on the stage as well.
Yeah, it's really fascinating to think about this phenomenon, which we think of as being very contemporary, right? The jukebox musical, right? Taking the songs of ABBA or the Four Seasons and structuring a kind of story around them for Broadway. Mm-hmm. But what you're saying, Jennifer, is that in some ways, Shakespeare and his company were doing something similar, where they were taking these kind of popular tunes that their audience would have loved outside of the theater, mm-hmm. and they were integrating them into a story with a plot and characters.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. We think, and my dear friend and colleague Ross Stuffen has written the book about it, Shakespeare Songbook. I highly recommend it. And in his research, he found that so much of the music, not just for As You Like It, but for most of Shakespeare's canon, was actually pre-existing pieces that were then, pulled in to the theatrical soundscape.
Much like his plays, which were, based on, most of them based on other rewrites of other sources.
Yeah, The Tempest, I think, is the one exception, really. Yeah.
And and Chad and Glenn, I'm curious if you have any thoughts as music experts and musicians in your own right about this question of like, you can recreate the words of Shakespeare with new music, or you can recreate the effect on an audience of hearing a popular song in a performance of a Shakespeare play.
I was just going to say that I think that it's the nature of the Beatles music that it's very pliable. It works. I mean, you can find almost any moment in your life where a Beatles song could apply. I think it's kind of an amazing feat of art, I think, to create a body of work that works that way. But I think that's what's being demonstrated when you see the play. I think that's what's demonstrated is, this is a moment where you can make a really dark Shakespeare play. You could do a very dark Shakespeare play with Beatles music. This is not a dark play, but I think there's a universality. There's a kind of I think that's what's being demonstrated here.
Well, and I think this universality is so interesting paired with As You Like It, because As You Like It, of course, is famous for the speech by Jaques in Act 2, all the world's a stage, and all the men and women merely players, right? There's this universality or applicability of Beatles music to seemingly any situation or any scenario in somebody's life, the way a good pop song should be applicable. But also Shakespeare.
That's arguable, but yes.
Well, yeah. Or is it the devil's in the details, right? The specific, the particular is what allows us to experience a sense of the universal.
For me, in this thing, there are moments where it makes total sense that this song will be used to elucidate this moment. I don't mean to suggest that it's just. I mean, it's not pablum. It's like there's specific jewels that are being brought in. But I think it. I feel like what happens, the dynamic that happens in this play, is the Beatles song is a moment to spend a reverie in that one small moment in the play, and then nobody can argue listening to a Beatles tune is always pleasurable. So I feel like what happens in those moments is there's a light shown on that particular nexus of drama, and then you go back into the play, and it's really, really well executed, I think.
Right, there's a seamlessness. But what I'm getting at, I guess, is this sense that Shakespeare as a playwright is reaching towards a universalism with this play. And the kind of wild vibiness, the kind of wildness of the plot, the sense in which we have an old man who's at the end of his life, we have young love, we have a sad man, we have happy men, we have shepherds and clowns. We have a kind of universal pageant in this play of the different types of human beings on display. There's an ambition by Shakespeare, and most scholars think this was the play that opened the Globe Theater, right? A theater where you could see everything and anything on stage.
Mm-hmm. And I would add to that too. He knew his company, his fellow, and all male stage at the time, right? His fellow performers, and I think he wanted to capitalize on. Not only does it offer to the audience kind of something for everybody with all these different aspects that Drew has outlined for us here, but it with the music too, right? And the grumpy Jacques, right? We've been there, right? I think that's kind of what is especially compelling to me is that the play offers something for everybody, but it also capitalizes on the strength of the performing company that he worked with so closely and knew so well, and himself was a part of.
Well, and clearly, whoever played Mercutio in Romeo and Juliet, or maybe Malvolio in Twelfth Night, there's a certain kind of through line of this sad character who's very good with language, right? Who's alienated from the group. Right, and in this play, that's Jaques, and he gets the most memorable speeches.
Quoted probably more than, almost more than anything else, is all the world's the stage line. And most people in the general public don't know that it is Melancholy Jake
And it's a total downer of a speech. It's about how we're all going to die alone.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the Beatles, there's a similar kind of, I mean, there's songs like All You Need Is Love. There's songs like Across the Universe. Right? There's a utopian or a universality that the Beatles, in some of their songs, are self-consciously reaching towards that to me feels Shakespearean.
I feel like there are these little nodes, dramatic nodes in Shakespeare all throughout this play. And I notice it as a style in almost everything that he wrote, where the character, there's a declarative, there's a sense that the character is going to explain to you, sometimes as soliloquy, sometimes as stated to another character, this is how I'm feeling right now. And it's kind of awkward because it doesn't really happen that often in real life, I don't think, where someone says, this is how I'm feeling. There are many moments in this play and in other plays where, and I feel like Beatles songs also have that declarative kind of quality of announcing and kind of describing an inner state. And I think that's a common technique in this.
Yeah, Glenn, what do you think about this question of the Shakespeare and the Beatles both self-consciously writing for a kind of world stage, this ambition by both these artists?
Well, first, just as a brief aside for those of you who haven't seen this yet, one of the things that I think makes this work so well, it's a wonderful band and a wonderful bunch of singers, and they're able to really deliver these songs in a way that makes them very entertaining. I think that makes a big difference. The songs are relatively simple, but they're often tricky to play properly, and this, as you'll see this afternoon, this band does a terrific job with all of that. It's, the Beatles are kind of a miracle. I've been thinking about this a bit because we're talking about universality and their enduring meaning and all of that, and all that's true, but that's not where they come from. I mean, they're a bunch of kids growing up in Liverpool after the war. They're trying to avoid having real jobs. Originally, they're trying to avoid going to school for too long. They take advantage of things like there's a new educational reform in Britain in the 1944 that allows them to go to grammar school, an advanced kind of state school, for free. The National Health Service is established a little after the war is over, so these guys are healthier than their parents. They're better educated than their parents. They come along at a time when artistic expression is getting looser. Lady Chatterley's lover a judge rules that it's not pornography and lifts the ban on it, so there's more sort of expression of freedom. And then, of course, there's the rise of the birth control pill. And so all these things come together for these guys, and they're not really thinking of universality. They're thinking how they can be in a band, as I say, avoid having a day job, get paid, get by, and even when they start to hit big, they're thinking, well, this will last 6 months, or this will last a year, or gee, let's get that movie thing going right now because in another year nobody will know or care who we are. It's all very makeshift in a way and very slowly evolving, but very, very quickly. There's something about them, as I say, somewhat miraculous, the way that and we've talked already, Chad especially about these songs and how they reach out to people. They're pretty simple songs. A lot of them are ballads, which comes back from the medieval and Elizabethan times. They're little narratives. They're all very repetitive. They're very straightforward. They're direct. And, and yet they find a way very early on. They don't start out thinking themselves as artists. John Lennon, I think, does to an extent. And he is pushing the idea that we're artists and we need to be able to develop this. But even Lennon is just thinking, can I make enough money so I don't have to go and work on an ocean
Initially,
liner?
it's guitars equals girls. That was the...
Well, there's pulling birds, as they describe it. The idea that, if you were a good musician, and they're handsome guys. I mean, they're the best looking band in Liverpool. So they have these things. They're in this seaport city that is sort of seedy and beginning to fall apart in many ways economically. And yet it's also a crossroads for all kinds of different cultures. Welsh, Scottish, English, all these things sort of pass through. Irish, there are a lot of Irish movement to Liverpool, starting with the famine. And then, of course, and there's West Indian music. There's all kinds of things coming together. And by some miraculous, form, these boys, and it's John and Paul, of course, but George as well, they managed to take this, and by some, trick, they start producing music that is so direct and so powerful and so universal, if you will, that and over time they begin to realize, especially after the 60th anniversary of them coming to New York for the first time is coming up in February of 2024. And that sort of begins to really globalize them in a way that nobody had been globalized before. But it's because the music, I think, and the performances seem so unique, even though they come from so many obvious strands. And you get that when it's combined with As You Like It, when it's combined with a sort of wonderful Shakespeare, but not Shakespeare at his heaviest or most existential, but Shakespeare who seems to be having a good time too. So all this kind of fits together I don't want to keep saying miraculous or magical. These are, men producing art almost inadvertently. I can't speak for Shakespeare, but the boys sort of stumbled into it. And it's, as Paul points out, only after New York do they begin to think, hey, we might be able to keep this thing going for a while. And it begins to change the way they think about themselves and they think about their music. It doesn't damage them, but they begin to find new ways, new instruments, new themes, things to add on, to layers on. One of the things, we talked about this before we came out today, this wonderful production doesn't just use songs from the first phase of their careers when they're singing, She Loves You and I Want to Hold Your Hand. It uses songs all through their career. It takes different elements and different themes, and the songs get more complex. And again, because it's a good band and good singers, they manage to be able to do that. But it sort of points out as the Beatles evolve, As You Like It is kind of evolving too, and so it's a wonderful mix.
Well, and what's so fascinating, Glenn, and thank you for that history lesson, really, I'm sitting here thinking, well, Shakespeare was the son of a glove maker from Stratford-on-Avon, and his friend Christopher Marlowe was also middle class and went to Cambridge. There was a whole generation of people in the 1580s or 90s who, unlike their fathers, don't go into shaving sheep and making gloves out of sheep, right? There's a lot of sheep talk also in this play, As You Like It.
Oh, yeah.
A lot of which has been cut for this performance.
We're not missing a whole lot.
but just like it's a completely world historically new phenomenon to form a band and then be on TV and then be world famous within 5 years, it's a completely new thing to move to London, to find these other people. You can speak these words that I'm giving you, and it can be Hamlet, right? And we can sell tickets, right? And we can have thousands of people coming a day, right? And by forming this own utopian kind of group or band of a company, theatrically, can change the world through art, which I think is what this play in some ways is about, right? It's the power of art to uplift or redeem or spread hope or optimism to a world that is troubled, right? We start in a very unhappy place at the beginning of As You Like It. People are getting threatened with death. People are getting banished. People are being kept apart. People are getting body slammed by a wrestler, And by the time we get to the forest, it's a little bit like 1967, where people are growing their hair out. People are experimenting with free love, right? There's this incredible efflorescence of hope and optimism that, again, the Beatles music maps onto in this kind of miraculous or uncanny way in this production. Jennifer?
Just to add that it's ironic in some ways, right? That Shakespeare and company, right? They the Lord Chamberlain's men later became the King's men, but they head to the city and the court. Right, the court is presented in this play as being a place that's, ideally it's supposed to be organized. Right, we're supposed to have it together, and we wear fancy clothes and cut our hair short. Right, and keep to the status quo. But going out to the forest, that is the space where the freedom happens and the exploration happens, right? And it's the keep an eye out on the fabulous wardrobe costumes, because it's mirroring that same kind of transition and like the necessity to kind of break away from tradition, or to break away from, I don't know, having a very clearly outlined plot or something like that, in which these creative, I don't know, germs can start to become seedlings and grow into beautiful flowers.
And it's, it's loosely conceptualized in this production. Like, we start in a kind of early 60s world, and I think I can say the name of the song they're singing at the pre-show, which is Money. That's What I Want. Right? Which was a cover. The Beatles in their early career covered this American soul song, basically, right?
It's Just Okay.
The song is just okay?
Yeah, it's just okay. It's a decent song. It's not an amazing song.
Barrett Strong?
I mean, it's all right. It's my opinion.
And the Beatles, they do a ton of covers in their early albums, right? And it's very kind of polyglot. It's a lot like Shakespeare early in his career, where he's taking bits and bobs from here and there. But once we move to the Forest of Arden, that's when you start to get the psychedelic Beatles and the kind of mid and late Beatles. And it's more musically sophisticated. It's sadder at times. It's more exploratory. It's more in touch with emotions. So this thing that's happening in the dramaturgy of the play is also reflected by the choice of music that is being woven into the play, which I think is also one of the reasons why it works so well. It's not just cutting and pasting this Beatles song there. It's perfectly suited to the mood and tone of this very wild, very all over the place kind of play. Chad, you look like you have a thing to say.
No, I was just going to say, for me, there is a commonality in all the world's a stage is obviously a profound, speech, but it's also, from another angle, it's kind of banal, and all you need is love, is the same sort of thing. Where, I mean, it's sort of, you can't argue that it's heavy and elemental and profound, but it's also sort of banal, I think when you're reaching out to that kind of, when you trying to have that kind of scope, human scope, you're going to end up with a lot of the great, profound things are also kind of rancid cliches, and I think that's a thing that both. I mean, nobody would deny the greatness of Shakespeare or deny the greatness of the Beatles, but they're also kind of they're just sort of utilities, social utilities in a way,
Right, they're both saying things that we know deep down to already be true, and we already agree with, but they're finding a completely new way of saying it.
Yes.
That makes us appreciate that experience.
Yes.
As if for the first time.
Yes.
Do we have questions for this amazing conversation? I feel like we've gotten very, very, into the details of Shakespeare and love and life and what it all means, and this kind of play I think lends itself to that. But any responses, comments? Questions, thoughts? Yes.
What besides the sheep stuff has been cut to make room for these songs?
Big, interesting question. I have some answers, but I'm interested if any of you who have been studying the play or reading the play have thoughts.
I was just going to observe that I feel like this is the editing is exquisite. The experience feels very complete. It does not feel like, there's no incongruity. It's pretty amazing how it works as a spell, essentially.
Yes, it's very faithful to the dramaturgy of Shakespeare's play.
Yeah, I would add, I don't, going exactly off of what Chad said, you're not going to miss anything, I promise. I have my dear students pore over, every word of and then we get bogged down in things like Touchstone's jokes. We were talking about this earlier, that they have no relevant meaning because, if you're looking at a scholarly edition, even folks who are steeped in the language have to look up every other word because the wordplay is so rapid and fast, and the language doesn't quite match what we're used to today because just things change lexically over the course of several hundred years, right? And so the only other thing I'd add is that as I think I mentioned before, the pieces of music that were in early productions of Shakespeare are not what's being sung here, but the overlaps between the thematic material in those pieces of music and what the Beatles has to offer. It's perfect.
I imagine that's where they started. I don't know how this was created, but I imagine that's how they started. Trying to make sure that the analogies all work.
They do, and I would say too, right? I counted. I think if I counted correctly, 24, right? 7 original-ish early performance songs in this play. 24 in this production. So even finding places, opening up the text and inserting music where it is. And I think Chad's absolutely right? We don't usually step out of character and say, I need to now share with you how I'm feeling about whatever it is that's going on. But good music does that. Popular music does that, right? Mm-hmm. Because it does resonate with us. And I think for me, if I may, it's almost even a little less that it's like genius as much as it is popularity, which is not to lessen the former with the latter, but just to say that so many people find things, hear things, have things resonate with them in the Beatles music. And it's very similar with the Shakespeare experience too.
One thing I noticed in watching the show, the combination of Beatles and Shakespeare makes the whole thing a little more sexy. The Beatles' early songs are very much, She Loves You, yeah. Very repetitive, very Moon and June style. The music's, I think, already getting sophisticated, but the lyrics aren't. However, when you put them in the forest and you're chasing around each other and you've got mistaken identities and gender switches and everything, the thing begins to get more tangy. And the music fits very, very well, whether it's early Beatles or later Beatles. The Beatles were always about we're always singing to women.
Not always. Got to Get You Into My Life is
it's
about
a marijuana
drugs.
song. Yes, that's true. But if you don't know that, and I didn't know that when I was 15 and heard it for the first time, it's a song about trying to get a woman into his life. Mm-hmm. Yes, I mean, the more you know, the more you can figure out other things, and it helps, and it's fascinating to know. But essentially, the Beatles are very straightforward. Again, he's singing, he's addressing, well, dope, grass, but really, but the way we hear it as a woman, and it's very sexy. And when it comes at that stage in the play, it really just feels like we're in the hands of people, we're really in the Beatles' hands and in Shakespeare's hands, but the brilliant people who put this together, and I do think they've done a wonderful job. That's the perfect song in the perfect place in the play, and it's very sexy.
It's human longing, I mean, you can't get more essential, profound than that,
And that's really the theme, right? By the time we get to the end of the play, it's desire, right? Desire moving in all of these, it seems almost uncontrollable directions, and kind of bringing, if I may, gender into the discussion too. One of the things I found so lovely about this was to hear the Beatles music in female vocal ranges, right? If Shakespeare were to walk in, I think he'd be delighted, firstly. And of many things he'd have to get over, but I think the one thing that would stand out to him incredibly is to hear women actually singing on a theatrical stage, right? That didn't happen during his lifetime. And so by the end of the play, right? And this is not a huge spoiler alert, but the desires do not work really in a whole lot of, they don't work in strictly heteronormative ways, we'll say. There's a lot of same-sex desires that are played out as the play continues on, and especially in the forest, too, to kind of open that up. And, thinking about the universal experience of love, it's, in Shakespeare's imagination, definitely not a heteronormative only representation. I think that's important to point out as well.
Was Shakespeare aware of, was there a level of meta comment in the gender stuff where there's a male actor playing a woman? Is there kind of another layer of...
Well, just to set this up, I think what we're talking about now is this plot device or this motif where Rosalind goes in disguise in Arden as a man. And in fact, the majority of the scenes, I think there's 5 scenes between Rosalind and Orlando where they woo each other in Arden.
Yes.
The majority of those scenes are 2 people who are dressed like men.
Presenting as men, yeah.
Presenting as men, talking about getting married, talking about making love to one another.
Yep.
And in Shakespeare's time, of course, these were men.
Yep.
On stage.
Right. A male.
I feel like it must have been
playing
confusing.
A woman playing a man, right? Thank you for that, Chad. Yeah, the meta levels are fantastic. And then, of course, there's a female character, Phoebe, who's in love with Rosalind as Ganymede, her male alter ego in the forest. And why does she dress as a man, right, is a big question my students always want to know. And it's because as a single woman in the vast wilderness of the forest, this was a way, Violet is the same thing in Twelfth Night, as a single woman, right, in a new place. It's a mode of protection, perhaps, again, ironically, that to present as a man means that the expectation is it wouldn't invite unwanted attention from males, again, in a space and in a time where a woman would have to be accompanied by a man. So that's why Eliana is allowed to present as a woman, or chooses still to present as a woman in the play. But it does flirt with all of these different kinds of desire, and how sometimes our desire, right, even it's a Shakespearean comedy, right? Which means it has to end in at least one, if not more, planned marriages, right? And so even with that kind of prescribed ending, there's still in the forest this space and freedom for all of these different kinds of desires and expressions.
And especially after the intermission break, it feels like with the arrival of Phoebe, who, shows up pretty late and is gobsmacked by seeing Rosalind or Ganymede or whatever their name is,
yeah.
right? It seems like the desire is running out of control by the end of the play, that everyone is in love with everyone else,
free love,
right? It's very free love, and it's like no matter what gender you are, it's as you like it, right?
Yeah, as they like it, as we like it.
As you like it, as I like it, as he likes it, as she... And Touchstone gets in on the action, he gets married, right? There's a kind of almost a sense of out of control desire. And you were talking, Glenn, about the sexiness, right, in this production, and I was saying the horniness in this production, right? These are people going back to nature in a way, right? Like moving to Woodstock and like communing with themselves
and for
in
the
nature.
Theater audience, could you? I mean, again, it's maybe a safe-ish space to kind of experience what that might be like, right? If your life is very different, right, sitting as a theater audience member, right? But it could be. Here's what life could be in the forest, right? What a neat place to day trip to.
And we did As You Like It about 10 years ago, which was a production without a lot of music in it, and with a lot of these complicated wooing scenes between Rosalind and Orlando, and that was a more kind of deep focus portrait of ambiguity, the ambiguity of desire, and whether Orlando knows that Rosalind is in disguise.
This is what I was just going to say. That
Yeah.
I hadn't seen. I don't know when I last saw As You Like It, but I don't remember Orlando being. Orlando's pretty hip, pretty early on.
Oh yeah. Well, there's a whole body of scholarship.
I didn't remember
saying
that.
Orlando knows it's Rosalind, but he wants Rosalind to remain in disguise because he's actually queer, and there's a whole body of queer scholarship and gender ambiguity and androgynous scholarship that's fascinated by this play specifically.
That's interesting.
Because Orlando does seem to know that Rosalind is in disguise, right? And there's a lot of unspoken subtext.
I mean, the actors definitely. I mean, when you see it, the actors definitely play it with a knowing kind of,
Wink.
yeah.
But what I was going to say is that this is the pliability of Shakespeare, the adaptability of Shakespeare. You can do a kind of very melancholy production of As You Like It. You could do a very queer production of As You Like It. Or you could do one like this that is full of joy and life and optimism and energy and a kind of sense of the robustness of physical animal desires that we all have, right? And so this production, I think, teaches me something about the play of like, oh, there's a very kind of wild energy in this play just waiting to be unleashed. And this production does that.
It's also kind of, the humor is really broad. I mean, I saw it with my son, and he's 13, and a lot of the humor is very, very broad. I mean, if you're used to, it's not, if you're used to kind of subtle, witty, this is very like, the jokes hit you. There's physical comedy. It's like played for the people, I guess. That was the thing that my son reacted to, because I think he was expecting the humor to be kind of more, sophisticated, or was like pretty broad.
As my wife pointed out, we lived in London for 6 years. We saw a number of British pantos at Christmas time. And this has that sort of British panto feel to it. It's very broad. It's almost vaudevillian at times.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, but it's really well done. I mean, pantos come in all shapes and sizes and all qualities. We've seen some that, are just, but the thing that holds them together is they're always fun, and they're always sexed up in strange ways, and somehow they work at Christmas time. That seems to be part of the deal. I mean, and it is definitely part of the deal. And so we've got As You Like It here in a way as a British panto.
Do we have any other questions? Yes, in the front row. Yes, sir.
It seems to me in this season, Shakespeare Theater has created things to attract younger people and a more diverse audience. And certainly with the Beatles and As You Like It, it's going to appeal to a lot younger people. Is this a deliberate policy and plan?
Are we trying to put on shows that more people want to see?
You're on to us.
Well, I do think, yeah, we were talking about this in the green room, that Shakespeare was a businessman. That
savvy business.
Very sad. I mean, and ended up retiring very wealthy. Bought a lot of real estate in Stratford.
Just as a side note to this, if I may, most of his fellow playwrights did not own shares in the acting company, right? And so he's unusual for many reasons, but I like to think about the fact that is he artistic? Absolutely, sure. Does he make choices based on what's going to get people to come see the plays? Oh, yeah, he sure does. And so most of his fellow playwrights did not, they'd write a play, sell it to whoever had the highest bid, and that he got a one-time payment. It behooved Shakespeare to have his company not only have his words, but to have, smashing performances. And he, I think, clearly achieved that. So
yeah.
I saw it Sunday night. And the audience that I was with gave us standing ovation. That being said, at the intermission, a man stood up in front of me and said, "I like Shakespeare, I like the Beatles, I don't like this." And he left. So I think anytime you mess with form, there are going to be people who aren't going to, be into it, I think. So I think there's a component of risk, in addition to reaching out. And I don't know. I mean, again, I saw it with my 13-year-old son, and the Beatles are old. It's all old to him, So I don't know that it's necessarily a sure thing generational ploy.
Beyonce or Taylor Swift is up right next with, I don't know, Love's Labours or something.
Oh God. Well, yeah. I think the rights might be difficult to get for Taylor Swift or Beyonce.
But 20 years from now.
No,
right?
but I do think, to answer your question seriously, it is a deliberate choice in programming, especially for the Harman, that we want to do shows in this bigger theater that are capable of putting more people in that theater and doing it in a way that is bold, that is risk-taking, that has a high level of quality, right? I think we tend to associate broad humor or musical theater not with quality because it's more popular, but it's actually very difficult to do well, And I think that's one thing we're committed to at the Shakespeare Theater, no matter what we do, is do it with the highest level of quality possible.
I think the singing is astonishing in this.
Agreed.
I mean, everyone is great, a great, really tuneful singer. All of them. It's kind of amazing.
And there's scenes where they're dancing and singing and acting.
It's not easy.
And they're out of breath. It's a very athletic company.
Yes.
And you think, wow, that is impressive.
That is something that struck me too. I mean, the Beatles, especially in their early career when they were performing, would stand there in front of microphones and they'd shake their heads a little bit and the girls would go crazy, of course, but they never moved. Other than that, John Lennon was asked about that. He said, well, we just sort of do what we always do. We stand in front of the microphone and twitch. You know, there's to see the physicality of this particular performance, it really sort of adds a new sort of level to the songs.
We have another question here in the front.
So good at that.
Not so much a question, but you know, I can segue from what you just said, because I was 11 or 12 when my dad took me to the Hollywood Bowl to see the Beatles. 1964, I think it was. They couldn't sing, and we didn't care. It was all this raucous, you know, drums and clanging, crashing stuff. I wouldn't know what the words were, except that, you know, we bought the albums and listened to them a million times.
You know, that's actually something that they found frustrating ultimately, and they end their career not playing shows because the mania and the noise, they felt like they weren't developing musically, and they lost interest in playing.
But I think there's a live album. I don't know if it's of that concert at the Hollywood Bowl, but there was a live album put out of the Beatles at peak, you know, stadium noise, and it's kind of inspired a whole genre of music. There's a band called My Bloody Valentine that like loves that. The lead songwriter loves that live album of the Beatles because the noise of the audience is replacing the noise of the or going simultaneously.
Becomes part of the art.
Becomes part of the art.
My dad couldn't understand, and he would go around the house for like weeks afterwards going, these girls, they would sit there going, George. I mean, I'm picturing up in my mind doing that because he couldn't understand what was the appeal. And for me, it was like everything.
That's the way it's supposed to work.
But it wasn't the music. They really couldn't sing. They were all off tone and you know.
Well, they couldn't hear each other. There were
they
no
could sing,
amps
but the
behind them,
circumstances were making
and drove them crazy. And in fact, there were times when George and John, being the lovely, humorous people they are, sang off tune, you know, on purpose, and did nonsense words and did other things because they couldn't hear it. Nobody out in front of them. The technology was it was the same technology as my garage band, a couple of small amps, you know, and that was it. But you know, that's what drove them, as Chad said, that drove them further into the studio. And also they evolved that way because they were changing, of course, and the technology was getting better. George Martin, their wonderful producer, I mean, part of the Beatles story is their great fortune to run into very creative people at the right moment in their careers. I mean, starting with their manager, Brian Epstein, but then going on to George Martin, who produced all their great stuff. And then in A Hard Day's Night with Richard Lester as their director. I mean, it's the best rock and roll movie probably ever made, I would say. They always are meeting up with people who are challenging them creatively, and they're always growing from that.
And they're making an art of their circumstance. Like the Beatles were, I mean, now when people say, in my line of work, when people say use the studio as an instrument, that's just a known thing a way of thinking about this recording studio. But the Beatles were the pioneers of that concept, you know, and George Martin, using the studio as an instrument.
Well, I mean, I think we could talk all day long about this. The show is at 2, and I want to let people grab lunch before the show. I just think as a way of tying up this very rich, fascinating conversation, and thank you all for your questions. You know, Shakespeare understood, and his colleagues understood, that theater was this revolutionary new art medium. And I think the Beatles similarly understood that being in a rock band could change the world, right? Could spread love across the universe. So I guess the question is like, what, 350 years from now, will the new Shakespeare or the new Beatles be, and how will this carry through across the universe
I'm not sure
spreading.
you can do it on purpose.
Yeah, I think it's so serendipitous, isn't it? It seems like such a serendipitous moment.
I think that some of the the worst failed art is when someone starts to have this idea that, oh, I'm very important. This is, I think if you make the work that feels true to you and you hope other people find it, I'm not sure that being self-conscious about this, the scale, the scope is helpful. When Paul McCartney, you see Paul McCartney interviewed about the Beatles, he has this really interesting, for me, kind of frustrating personality. I love the guy, but when he talks about the Beatles, he has this sort of humility that's almost irritating.
Right.
Oh,
we just
sounded good when we played.
we just said yesterday on scrambled eggs.
Right.
And I think that he's developed that kind of as a tactic, I think, for being around people who are, a lifetime of people telling you, you're a genius of the highest order. I think you kind of cultivate a kind of, so I don't know. I don't know how Shakespeare self-regarded, but
Well, and as you were saying, Jennifer, Shakespeare did not think his plays would be published.
Right. He didn't, from what we can tell, he didn't plan to publish the play, right? And it is the 400th anniversary of the publication of the first folio, which his friends got together and put together so that readers for all time can have this and read it again and again and again, right? Is what they say in the dedicatory epistle. And that you want to have friends like that, right? Was Shakespeare popular in his day? Yes. And his poetry, we were talking about earlier, he did publish poems, right? His sonnets in particular were the place where he imagined his writing being a kind of an memorialization of his beloved, right? And so there is that sense of reaching beyond. How far did he lean into it? I think is a really fascinating question. But what I will say about both of these wonderfully creative endeavors is that it makes me think about humanities, right? This is what we come to the theater because it makes us feel human, right? It connects us to other humans. It connects us, it kind of collates or pulls together these different points in time and space in this production in particular that reminds us of these largely universal experiences. And I think I'm so hopeful that we will, as we move forward as a human race together, we will have more of these opportunities and lean more into that.
All right, well, there you have it. You have become a better person by doing this here today. So thank you all, and thank you, Chad. Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, Glenn.
Thank you.